Earlier, US President Joe Biden responded to reports about a possible Israeli ground offensive in Lebanon at a press conference in the White House.
Israel may be now launching a limited operation into Lebanon. Are you aware of that? Are you comfortable with their plan?
I'm more aware than you might know, and I'm comfortable with them stopping. We should have a ceasefire now.
Hours later, the Pentagon came out with this statement. Secretary of Defense Lloyd has called his Israeli counterpart, agreeing on the necessity of dismantling attack infrastructure along the border to ensure that Hezbollah cannot conduct October 7th-style attacks on Israel's northern communities. He says a diplomatic solution is required to ensure that civilians can return safely to their homes on both sides of the border, and says there will be serious consequences for Iran if it chooses to launch a direct military attack against Israel. Phil Lavelle's in Washington, D.C. for us. So, Phil, we've got, on the one hand, we've got Joe Biden saying we should have a ceasefire now. On the other hand, we've got Lloyd basically saying, as far as the US is concerned, it's quite happy, or it certainly goes along with what Israel is trying to achieve in southern Lebanon. Do we have any indication of what the actual position of the US is in all of this?
Well, I mean, it varies depending on who you listen to. I mean, there is this feeling that any attempt to get Hezbollah degraded is a good thing as long as it can be contained. But then there are these concerns that this could lead to a wider conflict, which nobody in the Pentagon or the White House wants this to turn into. What was interesting was when we heard from Joe Biden, where he said that he is aware of more than perhaps we know. And the White House is pretty much putting this down to a win of sorts, if it can be called that, because this was one incident that the White House knew about. You know, we've had for several days, for several weeks, these actions that have been taken by Israel, where the White House has come out and said during briefings that it had no prior knowledge. So we're in this situation where you've got Joe Biden, who is, the most powerful man in the world, right? He's working with an ally that the US is strictly and staunchly behind, an ally that it protects, that it sends military aid to, billions of dollars every year. In fact, we just heard it a few weeks ago that there's going to be $3.5 billion more going this year. And yet when it comes to the two men, leader on leader, he is unable to have the influence over Benjamin Netanyahu that he perhaps once had or has always hoped that he could have, because Prime Minister Netanyahu appears to not be listening to Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is in this very unusual situation where he can't disavow Israel, because that would then show that there is some kind of lack of support between the US and Israel. And of course, there is this long-standing relationship. There is huge support for Israel in this country. He could impose conditions on the military aid, but again, that would show that there is some kind of fracture in the relationship, although we can see that there is a fracture in the relationship, but that could further embolden Iran, Hezbollah, and those proxy groups. And so Joe Biden is in this particularly awkward situation. At the same time, it's generally accepted among a lot of analysts here that Prime Minister Netanyahu is simply waiting. He's waiting to see what happens in the election, because we know that Donald Trump is a big supporter of Israel. He supported Israel wholeheartedly during his presidency. We know that they met recently when Prime Minister Netanyahu was here, not his most recent visit, but the time before, when he met Biden and he met Kamala Harris as well. And so there is this feeling that there is a calculation by Prime Minister Netanyahu to kind of wait this out. Joe Biden is effectively a lame duck president, right? He's going to be out of office in a matter of months. It's going to be either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. And if it is Donald Trump, the calculation is that perhaps he may have even more of a free rein to do what it is that he feels he needs to do in that part of the world.
Phil, I want to ask you briefly about something that we've just been seeing, that, again, against the backdrop of Joe Biden's calls for a ceasefire. I understand that there is some sort of troop movement that is being done towards the area. Now, I believe part of that is part of a standard rotation anyway, but I just wondered if you had any more information about the speculation that there are American troops that might be heading towards this region.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a build-up of assets in the region ever since the killing of Ismail Haniyeh back a few weeks ago, and that rhetoric that came from Iran. We saw that there were some warships, the USS Abraham Lincoln, moved into the area. Those were kept there. They were due to leave, but now they have been told, you stay put, and there are more assets that are on the way. We understand there are going to be some 40,000 US military personnel, and there are a number of assets on the way. We're told they include F-16s, F-15Es, A-10s, F-22 fighter aircrafts. The USS Harry Truman is also on its way. It left Virginia about a week ago. So there is this build-up in that part of the world. And what we're seeing is this parallel universe where on one side we're getting these statements from Lloyd Austin and Joe Biden, and they're talking about de-escalation and they're talking about diplomacy and how important that is. But at the same time, we are seeing this visible build-up, although the US is quite clear in saying this is a precautionary measure. And this is basically saying to Iran, back off. Don't get too close. And if you do, be prepared for the consequences, because we will be here. And we've ultimately got Israel's back.
Phil, thanks very much indeed. That's Phil Lavelle bringing us up to date from Washington, D.C.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.